When the rescuers arrived, something incredible happened. Orca, who was stuck and crying for hours, whined for her pa to come get her. She found herself beached on sharp rocks, and her family was unable to help her. However, the rescuers' actions were incredible. It is not a common sight to see an orca on dry land, but that was precisely what Eric Keane discovered when he went to investigate strange sounds he heard while sailing the seas around British Columbia early on the morning of July 1st, 2015. Eric, a whale researcher on his vessel, the Bangarang, was conducting a study on fin whales in the area when he heard mournful cries coming from a small outcropping of jagged stone on the shore of Andrew Rocks. A young orca was in obvious distress, wedged between sharp rocks, and was increasingly out of the water, according to Janie Ray and Herman Mutter from the Save Our Seas organization, around 7:30 a.m. Hey there, amazing stories here before we go on. Like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell. We post the most beautiful and amazing videos every single day. Let's proceed. Eric contacted the local environmental group, Whale Point, to inform them of what he had discovered. Based on Eric's description, the orca experts at the organization realized what must have occurred. Orca pods in that area would frequently work together to hunt seals for food. Some orcas would chase the seals towards the shore, while others waited patiently to spring the trap. The young female orca must have misjudged her position and found herself in shallower and shallower water as the tide receded until she became wedged between the rocks with no way to extricate herself. She was bellowing for help, obviously scared and likely in pain, when Eric sailed nearby. Ginny and Herman, who were well acquainted with Eric and often collaborated with him on their research, were returning from Hartley Bay to their base when he alerted them to the young orca's predicament. They knew that time was critical, and they would require all the assistance they could get. As they rushed north to join Eric in Squally Channel, Janie and Herman contacted Gitka's Guardians at Hartley Bay, as well as Fisheries and Oceans Canada, DFO, both marine organizations, to inform them of the young orca's desperate situation. Meanwhile, Eric and his crew approached the orca cautiously to see if they could assist her in getting off the rocks. At first, they did not get too close to avoid startling her, causing her more distress, or possibly hurting her while attempting to escape. The reality was that if they tried to lift or pull her off the rocks, it would have caused severe injury, as the rocks were covered in barnacles that could cut her skin. The orca was already bleeding slightly from her pectoral area and tail. Upon Ginny and Herman's arrival, Eric learned that John Ford and Paul Cattrall of DFO had given guidance over satellite phone to keep the orca cool and wet until the tide rose again, allowing her to free herself. However, the tide would not rise for another 8 hours. Thus began the arduous rescue operation. When the rescuers first approached the orca, she was understandably anxious about their intentions. Trapped and uncomfortable, surrounded by humans, it must have been a terrifying experience for the young killer whale. Her breathing was quick and shallow, and her position wedged between the rocks made it increasingly difficult for her to breathe. Eric came up with a clever solution, creating a makeshift water pump using a hose and some duct tape. He went to the back of the island and worked the pump, while Herman used the hose to douse the orca with cooling seawater. The rescuers soaked sheets in seawater and gently placed them along the length of the orca's body. As they worked, they noticed that the orca's cries were quieting down, and her breathing became calmer. It seemed that the humans had gained the orca's trust, as they were the ones comforting her, while her family could only stay in the nearby waters and call out to her. The rescuers worked in shifts to keep the young orca cool and wet, taking turns to pump seawater over her and replace the sheets covering her with cooler, freshly dipped ones. They noticed that the orca's dorsal fin was getting dry and used a pillowcase from Eric's boat to wet it and keep it cool. The weather had been fortunate all morning, with gray and overcast skies, but as the sun rose to its zenith at noon, the cloud cover dissipated and the heat intensified. Despite the heat, everyone worked tirelessly to keep the orca cool and wet, taking care of her as if she had a fever. They replaced warmer coverings with cooler, wetter ones, dousing her with seawater from the pump to prevent her from drying out. The rescuers couldn't help but think how dire the situation might have been for the young orca if Eric had not heard her cries. The rescuers refrained from covering the orca's head as they did not want to startle her by suddenly blocking her vision. However, the intense sun made it essential to shield the orca's delicate skin from the heat and dryness. Janie observed as one of the team members carefully approached the orca, slowly moving underwater in front of her head and gently placing a wet and cool sheet over her head, ensuring not to cover her blowhole. The young age and relatively small size of the orca, at only 9 years old and weighing around 7,000 pounds, 3,175 kilograms, worked in her favor. The average life expectancy for orcas in the wild is between 30 and 50 years. However, a fully grown male can weigh up to 16,000 pounds, 7,257 kilograms. If the beached orca had been older and bigger, the pressure on her lungs would have been higher, and she might not have survived until the next tide. After the water pump broke, Eric tried to fix it with duct tape, but it was no use. However, the rising tide provided a glimmer of hope. After a grueling 9-hour ordeal, the rescuers could finally set the young orca free. Carefully, they removed the wet sheets covering her body and head and the pillowcase from her dorsal fin. They knew it was time for her to take charge of her own fate and swim out of her rocky prison. To avoid startling her and causing further harm, they retreated to a nearby cliff to watch and wait. With bated breath, they sent her all their good wishes and positive energy, hoping she would find the strength to free herself. As the water level slowly rose, the orca cried out again, this time with a different tone, perhaps a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Despite this, she remained still, occasionally lifting her tail, but not attempting to swim away. The orca's rescuers began to worry as she didn't seem to be making any attempt to swim despite the rising water level. They considered the possibility that she might be more injured than they initially thought or too exhausted to make the final effort to escape. However, they soon realized that they just needed to trust in the orca's natural instincts. By moving her tail, she had been testing the water's depth and safety, and when she knew it was safe, she suddenly propelled herself out of the rocks with 2 powerful thrusts, free at last. Her human rescuers on the boats and rocks surrounding her cheered and screamed in exhilaration and relief. They had succeeded after more than 9 hours of hard work and tender care in keeping the young orca alive and well until she could reunite with her pod. Eric, one of the rescuers, had placed a hydrophone in the water and played the orca's song as she vocalized repeatedly, calling for a response from her family. For a while, her voice was the only one heard. Eric and his team of rescuers were momentarily worried about the whereabouts of the young orca's pod. Had they abandoned her after her prolonged time on land? Had they left to grieve her loss? As distant responses to the orca's cries began to emerge, a wave of relief washed over the waiting team. The young female could also hear her family's replies and swam towards their transient calls, speeding away in excitement and the exhilaration of being released. The team of human rescuers stood together, overwhelmed with pride and emotion for what they had accomplished. Each of them had given their all and breathed a collective sigh of relief. They knew that the experience they shared that day would stay with them forever. What a great ending. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video and subscribe. See you next time.